The original Libertalia, released in 2012, designed by Paolo Mori, is a well-respected and well-loved game that has been out of print for years, and much to the delight of the gaming community, the classic game has now been reprinted in a new edition as Libertalia Winds of Galecrest by Stonemaier Games. And not only is this a bright, fresh coat of paint on this beloved game, but also it adds some new features. It implements some new things. And today I want to talk about 3 reasons why I think this is a new benchmark in the way that we practice cardboard necromancy, bringing games back from the beyond. But first, a quick 411 for anyone who needs the skinny on what is Libertalia. In Libertalia, players are trying to score the most cash by the end of 3 rounds, called voyages. At the beginning of each voyage, one player shuffles their deck and reveals 6 cards, and all players retrieve the matching cards from their own decks to make up their hands. Then, loot is set out for 4, 5, or 6 days corresponding to rounds 1, 2, or 3. Then, all players from their initially identical hands secretly select and simultaneously reveal 1 card, which is then aligned in ascending order with ties broken by reputation, and the current day is resolved. Going up the line from lowest to highest, any daytime abilities are resolved, then going down the line from largest to smallest, players resolve their character's dusk ability, score a loot from the current day, resolving any of its dusk effects as well, then move their character to their ship. Effectively the player area that's not quite a discard pile yet. Once all dusk abilities are resolved, all nighttime abilities of characters in your entire ship trigger, usually persistent coin earning or loss abilities based on varying conditions. Then you repeat the days over till the end of the voyage, at which time you'll resolve all anchor abilities on loot and characters in your ship, convert all of your money into points on the point dial, then discard all characters and loot tokens to start the next voyage. What makes it so intriguing is that because you get 6 new characters to add to your hand at the beginning of each voyage, and the first 2 voyages have fewer than 6 days, players' hands start to diverge even though they hail from the same pool of 18 cards, each with interesting, dynamic, and oft synergistic abilities. Add to that some really compelling effects on loot that range from set collection to fat stacks to deviously cool impacts like keeping characters around in your ship from voyage to voyage, so their passive or end round effects can trigger again, makes for a very approachable, though a very strategic and apprehensive in the most hilarious ways, card-laying game. So the first thing, and probably the most important thing whenever you're looking at releasing a new edition of a game, is that you want to preserve the core spirit of the game, which this does, but at the same time, it expands, it adds more dimension, a little bit more meat onto the bones of the original. I mean, sure, the core experience that you know and love if you play the original is there, of playing your pirates and then trying to get the loot. But by making the loot itself have in-game effects and being able to swap over the board or lay those tiles out to mix up the stormy and clear sides of the board, it adds more consideration over everything that you're doing. There are going to be times in which you're going to want to preserve your shipmates from round to round to round, and that's going to be more valuable to you than the 5 gold that comes out of a chest. Similarly, adding more cards adds more replayability. The already existing 30 card count was a lot of content, like that was a lot of pirates to deal with, but now having 40 cards per player ensures that you're going to see some surprising combinations and some interesting strategic decisions that didn't come up in previous games. And then you add to that the changes to the lengths of voyages, having first 4 days and then 5 days and then 6 days, remixes the entire value proposition of everything that you're going to be playing. There are some crew members who are going to be worth more earlier on in early voyages and some that are going to pay out later on. What's great about all of this is it doesn't make the game inherently any more complicated, but it does make it more rich and complex. You are still fundamentally making the same types of decisions, you just have more tension over what's going to grab your attention as you are deciding deciding what cards to play and when, which is brilliant. Second, and probably the most immediately noticeable thing, is that this has a brand new visual identity, like a bonkers good visual identity. This kind of blew me away, having this bright, beautiful, inviting, and vibrant world with these characters that exude so much personality, making my 5-year-old Thundercat Uber fan heart sing. And it extends way beyond just the illustrations. You have all these beautiful components that are lush and lavish, but it also streamlines the user interface of the game, just making everything fall into one of those 4 core symbols for either daytime, dusk, night, or the anchors for when you return from your voyage. Just makes it so easy to parse all the different abilities, the flow of the game. It all works so cohesively, organizing the game a lot more. Not to mention, those tiles are, they're beautiful. They're like the Zool tiles. You just want to clink them around in your hands. You want to take ownership of them, which in a game all about piracy and ownership and adventure and treasure collecting, it's good that you have tokens that you want to hoard for yourself. Oh, and while we're on the topic of components, can we talk about Stonemaier had the courage, the gall to release a game in a classic 12 by 12 box size and not have a rulebook that took up the entire thing. I can actually use this. I can have this on the table as I'm learning to play the game. This is neither here nor there when it comes to re-releasing a game, other than more games, all games, re-release games, new games should have rule books about this size. Ooh, that's an aside. And another unintended consequence of having a brand new shift to a bright new visual identity, which I love, is that it allows the legacy of the original edition, if that makes sense. The original black Libertalia box with the traditional real-world pirates is now going to be something that is a collector's item. I definitely prefer this new visual identity, but the original now can stand on its own artistically and not just mechanically, which I think is a great way of acknowledging the players who already have the game and love the game, and not have them feel like this is just the same game except better, though mechanically it really is. And lastly, what this does is it fixes some of the issues with the original game. There are balance changes on the cards. Some of the abilities may seem familiar from the original game but are slightly tweaked, but beyond that, the reputation system, having all the tokens out regardless of player count to create this ladder that is constantly rotating where you have to climb several rungs if you sunk yourself down in order to get all the way to the top, as well as interacting with the different abilities on certain cards. And then, of course, the biggest overhaul, implementing the midshipman for the 2-player mode, which makes it so that there's an important but very easy decision that's made that will affect both players and gives an advantage to one of the players if the cards play out a certain way. It makes you think a lot more about what cards you're playing and what your opponent is going to be playing, and makes a 2-player game much more tense in a way that the original never was. And in a world in which so many games are marketed to this massive player count, it is really refreshing to have a solid 1 to 6 player game, which this also introduces solo, which is really important, but from a modern context is kind of expected. But it really stabilizes 2-player in a way that the original Libertalia never was, with such a simple and elegant solution. So to recap, it adds new dimension to the game without sacrificing the core concept. It has a brand new, vibrant visual identity that preserves the legacy of the original edition for people that have that, and it fixes and balances some of the issues with the original game, all while successfully being a re-release of one of the most beloved out-of-print games of the last 10 years, which to me is a new benchmark in exactly how we should be resurrecting these games. And that's it. That's our review. But I want to know your thoughts. What are games that you want to see brought back from the dead in a similar way? And what are the things that you most look for in new editions of games, especially ones where there's been such a long time between the original release and now, and a new company has taken over their hands on it? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching, thanks for supporting, thanks for being awesome gamers in an awesome community. I've been Jack for the Cardboard Herald.